Wait for a sign from you guys. Okay, I will start the press conference. This press conference is called Truth in Targets. My name is Susanna Tol from Wetlands International, and I will chair this press conference. Parties will have higher reduction targets in the second commitment period, and LULUCF can and should make a significant contribution to reducing emissions. Therefore, the sector should take its responsibility by creating the rules and the opportunities to do so. The Ecosystems Climate Alliance believes parties should adopt an approach that accounts for changes in emissions that the atmosphere sees. This would discourage further emissions from logging and other land use, such as peatland drainage for agriculture, including biofuel crops. We are very worried that the direction it is going now will create huge loopholes in LULUCF, thereby evading accounting for up to 1 billion tons of greenhouse gas pollution from the destruction of native forests and wetlands. We are joined by the International Youth Delegation and by the Indigenous Environmental Network in our mission. The speakers that are going to talk to you are Peg Putt from the Wilderness Society, and she will explain you the situation and our perspective on this. And after her, Abigail Bora from the International Youth Delegation, known as the Yangos, and Kenny Mossett from the Indigenous Environmental Network will also comment on this. I will first give the word to Peg Putt.
Thank you very much, Susanna. Well, parties are currently in closed-door meetings as we conduct this media conference. They went in to begin deal-making on LULUCF in earnest about an hour ago. They've been meeting in secret all week on a deal that will evade accounting for hundreds of millions of tonnes of greenhouse gas emissions from forests and peatlands of developed countries. So whilst you have heard a lot about reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, trying to get emissions down effectively in the land sector in developing countries, developed countries don't seem to think that the same requirement to contribute from land and forests applies to them. Today, we're launching a Truth in Targets campaign, highlighting the imminent decision to entrench these loopholes in land use change and forestry for developed countries. We've just been upstairs, door-stopping delegates and urging them not to agree to the rules that hide emissions, but rather to be honest about them and seek to reduce them. So how does this loophole business work? And what are the implications for the overall negotiation of a climate agreement? The loopholes represent as much as 10% of 1990 greenhouse gas emissions. Now, 1990 is the yardstick year against which emissions are measured and reduction targets of developed countries are made. Therefore, such a large number of unaccounted for emissions would substantially undermine developed country targets. For example, if around the world on a really good day we got a 40% pledge combined from all the developed countries to reduce emissions, it would be undermined by up to 10% by the LULUCF loopholes. So targets for emissions reduction should actually mean what they say. They won't if these loopholes are cemented into LULUCF. Just quickly, to explain how these two loopholes are comprised, the first one is in relation to logging, known politely here as forest management. And you've probably heard a little about that one already. Basically, developing countries are pushing for a framework that allows them to increase logging emissions. They plan to conduct business as usual logging plus increased logging, and then by an interesting accounting trick, make that the yardstick against which they measure whether they've done well or badly on their emissions. In other words, all the emissions that go on now from logging, plus additional ones that are planned, go into their reference level, and it's only a deviation from that that gets taken account of in LULUCF. It hides 500 million tonnes. For peatlands and other activities, it's the drainage of organic soils, that is peat, that is the main concern. You've heard about peatland emissions from Indonesia, from the peatland forests, but probably you haven't heard so much about the emissions from drained peatlands in developed countries. But again, when these areas have been drained, for as long as they continue to be drained and are not made wet again by re-wetting, then emissions continue to come off those lands. At the moment, there's a huge amount, possibly another 500 million tonne of emissions coming out of these drained organic soils. And of course, they're used for cropland management and grazing land management, increasingly for growing crops for biofuels. But it is not compulsory to account for them, and it looks like it will continue to be only voluntary. When that's the situation, countries don't account for them when they're highly emissive. So we're looking for an agreement to a new activity of wetland management to close that particular loophole and a move towards mandatory and comprehensive accounting of land-based emissions. Here's the Truth in Targets leaflet. Please, anybody who's interested, circulate it as far as you can. Thank you.
Thank you, Peg. The next speaker is Abigail Bora.
Yes, so as Susanna said, my name is Abigail Bora, and I will be speaking on behalf of 1,000 youth who have come to Cancun for COP16 and thousands of others who are here in spirit. The international youth delegation is shocked by the horrendous logging loopholes that will allow Annex I countries to evade accounting of their carbon emissions. The proposed land use change, and forestry rules are disastrous, and if not modified, will allow developed nations to hide up to 1 billion tons of emissions with impunity. These loopholes reflect a major deviation from the necessary science-based emission targets necessary to combat climate change and pose catastrophic consequences for youth and future generations. Deforestation and degradation are responsible for almost 20% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Those who have caused the problem must fix it. LULUCF loopholes trespass responsibilities from Annex I polluters to those who have done little to cause the problem. Countries must not be allowed to evade accounting for greenhouse gas pollution from the destruction of biodiverse intact forests and peatlands. It is crucial that greenhouse gas reduction targets set by countries are truthful and accurate. We demand a forest definition that distinguishes between natural forests and plantations. The text must ensure that countries account for the emissions that result from the conversion of natural forests to plantations. Policy must state that forests into plantations is not sustainable and ensure that countries account for the resulting emissions. LULUCF cannot remain a mechanism for hiding emissions and corrupting countries' greenhouse gas reduction targets if we want to effectively and expediently mitigate the effects of climate change. Developed countries have an obligation and must address the problems they have created by accounting for and reducing all of their emissions. Youth demand truth in targets and will relentlessly stand against the LULUCF emissions loopholes that allow deceptive polluters to escape their commitments. We demand that these perverse loopholes be closed and that countries are held accountable for the destruction of forests and peatlands. We demand transparent targets that truly reflect the most accurate estimates of carbon emissions in the land use sector and any other sectors. When countries escape accounting for their emissions, those most vulnerable to the effects of climate change suffer. As youth, we demand that our country delegates take a strong, ambitious lead to provide genuine protection of intact forests. We are asking countries to look beyond the short-term incentives and address issues that transcend borders and affect us all. If developed countries do not close the logging loopholes in Cancun, how will they ensure a safe climate for the future and the future of our children? We, the international youth, demand that the perverse LULUCF loopholes be closed and that countries are held accountable for the destruction of forests and peatlands. Tomorrow at 1 p.m., we will be staging an action in front of the Moon Palace's Tekka building and invite you to join us there.
Thank you, Abigail. The last speaker is Candy Mossett from the Indigenous Environmental Network.
So, hello, friends and relatives. My name is Eagle Woman. I am here representing the Indigenous Environmental Network. And you've just heard a lot about the specifics through the loopholes. And what I wanted to do was talk a little bit more about what this means for people from impacted communities like myself. I come from a community in North Dakota in the United States, a reservation where we have a lot of pollution taking place through projects that are happening there. These types of loopholes that happen within this larger framework, these closed-door negotiations that are happening here, and these projects that have loopholes, like reducing emissions through deforestation and degradation, RED, these types of projects allow countries like the United States to continue polluting and to continue literally killing our people. I almost didn't come here this week because last week we buried my friend who had cancer, and 2 days later we buried my mom's friend who had cancer, and on the same day found out that my other friend's father, his cancer spread to his brain. And that's just 3 people in 1 week. It's like that for me every day at home, because in the United States, instead of taking responsibility, they come up with these schemes to continue polluting, but they put the blame on people in other countries. They make it seem as if it's their responsibility, and it's not. And as a representative of the Indigenous Environmental Network, I want to say that some of these projects that are already on the ground, they sound really great. They sound like some main blanket that can help us end poverty, end climate change, and make everybody in this world happy. But in reality, there's not one cover blanket that can do all of that. We need to get back to localized, sustainable economies, and having countries like the United States, who only has 4% of the world's population but provides 25% of the pollution, take responsibility and not come out of these negotiations with schemes that allow the pollution to continue, like the loopholes in LULUCF, like the loopholes that are contained within RED. We here are really drawing a hard line and are saying that we see how Indigenous peoples in other countries are being impacted and how we at home are being impacted. And what it's causing amongst us is a divide and conquer mentality. And it's hard because I see every day, people getting sick, people dying. I wanted to bring a picture of my friend. Her name's Heather. She had 2 little babies. And she's no longer here because her cancer killed her in less than a year. And this is the reality that we're facing at home. I want people to understand that we're not bad. We're here because we truly know and believe that these schemes are not working. They're allowing our country in the United States to get away with some really bad things, and it's impacting us every day. We're already dealing with water issues in Arizona. You know, these wars that are going to continue to get worse unless we really sit down and take that responsibility and come into these types of negotiations with open minds and open hearts. Because when I come here, that's not the feeling that I get. It's not a place of openness and an inclusiveness. And just because I'm a youth doesn't mean that I don't know what I'm talking about, because I fully understand that's kind of some of the context I've been hearing around here. And I want people to understand that people like us, like my friend Heather, and like my mom's friend Jody, 31 years old and 48 years old, are dying all the time because of pollutions within our own country, and then loopholes for these schemes in other countries. And that's why we're here holding the hard line against these things that do not have safeguards. We're not against saving the forest, nobody is. But within these types of schemes and negotiations, the devil is in the details. You start getting into these details that say, well, we're also going to do this, what the ladies here shared with us, and we're also going to hide these emissions so that we can continue polluting. And as human beings, we need to take a hard line. We need to be responsible for our action and our inaction. And that's why the youth are here with such a strong statement to say no. Because where will the people that are in these negotiations be in 50 years? I plan on being here, and I really hope that we can make a change. And I just want to close by saying, I realize that we're not necessarily going to come in here at this COP and completely change everything necessarily. We came here with the mindset that we were going to tell the truth. We were going to come and tell the truth and hope that was enough, understanding that if we weren't here at all, then we would be guaranteed to fail. And we are here thinking that that might not happen. We have hope. We're encouraged by the allies that are here with us, and we hope that everybody watching this and everybody that's listening to us speak today know that we do have the answer and that we do know what we need to do, and we just want to be able to be a part of the process in a fair way. We want to respect Indigenous people's rights, and we want free, prior, and informed consent to say yes or no to projects. Matsigarats, thank you.
Thank you, Candy. We will take the remaining time for questions. Yes. Gentleman to the left, you raise your hand. Yes.
Hi, Giles Parkinson from Climate Spectator. Just with the peatland drainage, you say it's happening in developed countries here. Can you sort of enlighten us a bit more about which developed countries it's happening in, or more than anywhere else? And just so I can understand it better, does that also happen in developing countries, or if not, why not, or is that accounted differently under a different mechanism?
Yes, the drainage of peatlands is an issue in both developed and developing countries. The largest emissions taking place in Southeast Asia, but it's not just an issue in Southeast Asia. The second larger emitter of peatland drainage actually is the EU. And within the EU, the European part of Russia is the second largest emitter. So there's other countries like Finland that have significant emissions, Belarus, Germany, Poland, the UK, the country where I come from, the Netherlands, also has drained a lot of emissions, drained a lot of peatlands. So it's an issue in many, many countries.
I'm Alex Abutu. I'm a journalist from Nigeria. My question is for Abigail. Yeah, the youth, all the delegates here who are negotiating came from various countries. And your organization, you are spread all over the countries. Now I want to know, what action did you take before you come in here? Because before coming to this negotiation, most of the delegates have mindset. It was agreed in their country. It was a decision of what they want to achieve here, what point they're going to push here. So your demonstration or your protest here, what will you achieve, and what did you do in the various countries before coming to Cancun? Thank you.
So you're asking what we hope to achieve with our action. I think part of it is just raising the awareness of the issue. Just first of all, on a really base level. And it's showing people what's going on, and it's making that public, whether it's attracting media attention, or it's just having delegates who don't understand the issues further understand them in a way that's more public. It's also drawing an attention that's outside the negotiating rooms. Right now we're seeing that a lot of the negotiations are behind closed doors, and we're trying to take an issue that's become very secretive and bring it to a public space.
Before you came here, did you take out any action in your various countries before coming here, to raise awareness, to register your protest against the decisions that delegates are going to take here?
I think before a lot of the international youth came here, we talked with our delegates who are coming and tried to lobby them on the issues that we thought were very important to them. I can't speak for everyone, but I personally talked to some delegates, and I don't know if that's going to make a difference. I think that anything we can do is worth trying, and it's not worth giving up to try and talk to people about the issues, try to raise awareness, and bring attention to the fact that there are loopholes in LULUCF that are allowing countries to continue emitting, and under the guise of forest management, we can change forests into plantations, and we don't have to account for those emissions.
Are there any further questions? Yes, in the front. One moment, the microphone is coming.
Hi, my name's Diana Wu, and I was hoping that Candy could speak to the relationship of indigenous rights to forestry protection. In addition to what you told us about the emissions being able to continue at home, meaning that more people would continue to die. And then for the other speakers, I'd also ask, what is your organizational position on indigenous rights in relationship to LULUCF? Thank you.
And also I wanted to add, could you also tell us a bit of some of the successes that you have achieved since you came here? Have you managed maybe to convince some people to change their mind? And
can I change my question? Okay, actually, I'd also, I think the question about what people did before they came here is a really good one. And so maybe, I know we could also just ask that of all of the speakers, yeah? Like what kind of organizing work was happening before you came?
Okay, wow. So I had heard what did people do before they came here, and also how does the loopholes reduce, how does it relate to Indigenous people's rights? So I know that the Indigenous Environmental Network has been planning before they came here for quite a while. We had several preparatory meetings to come here. We talked with our youth delegates. We met with youth delegates from other countries to talk about what some of the projects that were going on in their countries meant for them. And that's kind of one of the reasons that we have such a strong stance against market schemes that have loopholes, market schemes that don't have the truth in them because there's no safeguards. And so we're here to say that, you know, we're definitely feel that forests, things need to be protected, of course. But on the other hand, some of these projects with LULUCF, with the text as it currently is, it's actually going to increase emissions. And that's not what they said that they wanted to do with this text. It was to decrease emissions. The same thing is true of projects like REDS. It's not ready. And one of the scary things is that that's being pushed heavily here. And we're here to say that, yeah, we definitely want things like that to have safeguards, but if they don't, we can't sign off on it. We can't move forward with it because we're seeing projects that are happening in other countries that are already causing emissions to increase. And in addition to that, as an Indigenous person representing the Indigenous Environmental Network, this type of language that we see in here is another idea of privatization. It's another idea of commodification. It's a commodification of the sacred. And it's a hard line to draw, but it really is a commodification of the air all the way around. And we can't stand behind that as Indigenous peoples because that is not appropriate. That's not something that we are here to do. And we understand that when we start getting into commodifying the sacred, it's going to lead into a spiraling downward effect, a snowball effect of continual increased emissions and continual degradation to the people that are the most impacted, which are the people, also Indigenous peoples in the United States and Indigenous peoples worldwide. The blame is being put back on us, and the big corporate interests can continue to pollute. And so that's our message here, is that We cannot support something that isn't ready to go. REDS is not ready, and we need to respect Indigenous people's rights who have been managing their forests for years and years and years, time immemorial. And it's very scary to see these loopholes in the language that are actually going to increase emissions.
Okay, thank you, Candy. Briefly, the word to Peg in answer to the question posed.
Yeah, sure. In relation to Indigenous rights, the Ecosystems Climate Alliance has a very strong position in support of Indigenous rights and interests. We've mostly pursued that in relation to RED, but also because I work on LULUCF, we've been raising the fact that there are no safeguards at all in LULUCF for Indigenous rights and interest, neither for biodiversity safeguards for that matter. Personally, I've spent quite a lot of time living and working in Aboriginal communities in Australia, and I'd perhaps break into some more Indigenous language at this point and say, Nalil nega maratun, yakamanmak, baadi baadi mangmak, meaning, where are we going? At the moment, it's no good, but by and by, if we keep trying, we'll make it good. It's a difficult issue. We've been organising for some years. We do phone links internationally every week, and we've been lobbying at home with governments in the various countries where we are represented around the planet.
Thank you, Peg. We have 1 more minute for one short question and one brief answer. There's no more questions, then I close this press conference. Thank you all for coming.